All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Baltimore Sun. Thanks for attending our Newsmaker Forum this evening. This is the fourth in our series with gubernatorial candidates this spring, and we're very pleased to have Harford County Executive David Craig here with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here since I started my career when I was 11 years old delivering the Evening Sun.
Oh.
And I see it's still up here.
Yeah.
And I made $1.15 a week.
Well,
delivering the paper. So
we're at least like 50% higher than that now.
But I got one free paper every week that I could get. So.
An excellent deal.
Yes.
So the way we'll handle the evening is we'll give you a chance to make a few opening remarks, and then I'll jump in with questions. We've already gotten a few questions in over email and Facebook, and if anyone in the audience has questions, we ask you to write them down on a card, and our folks will send them to me by the magic of email, so we can kind of keep the conversation flowing. And thank you so much. And
Second.
oh,
okay.
So you're getting some sartorial advice from the audience here.
Okay.
So, all right, thanks. Mr. Craig, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, the one thing I think I would love to start with the Sun is that of all the candidates that are running, I'm the one who has the biggest connection with Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I'm a 10th generation Marylander, but I can tell you that my wife's mother was born on Gulf Street, so we know all about that area of town. I had an aunt that used to live off 36th Street, so we could see the Orioles playing all the time. Our second oldest granddaughter was born right here at Mercy Hospital. So we have all these personal connections, and not just political connections, but then when, unlike some of the other people who are running, having just been born here, I also went to school here. So I went to Towson State College, and I went to Morgan. So we have those connections here. We didn't have to leave the state. We know that Maryland and Baltimore have really great universities and colleges to go to. And then since that time, having been county executive, I've served on the Baltimore Metropolitan Council as the chair. So I have those connections with all of the area and a very good working relationship with your mayor. Stephanie does a great job, and strangely enough, I sat behind her father when I was in the House of Delegates. Yeah. So we served together there, and currently serve on the Shock Tribal Board. Mm-hmm. So we have real personal connections, and I can tell you that when we're done, my wife will probably want to pick the restaurant in Little Italy that we're going to go to, or someplace like that. So we really love Baltimore, and we wear orange and purple. We're Oriole and Ravens fans. Well, so we love Baltimore.
Excellent. All right, well, we've got a few questions in already. Let's start off a few of them on education, obviously a topic you're very familiar with from your long time as an educator. Daniel Ewald on Facebook asks what your position is on universal pre-K.
We have a daughter who actually teaches pre-K. Mm-hmm. And the reality is about pre-K is that 3- and 4-year-olds don't really go to school for 8 hours a day. That's not where they learn. They learn from their parents, they learn from their older brothers and sisters, they learn from older children, and they actually learn from playing, not from sitting in a classroom. And it would be better to continue to put the financial needs into the school systems that are already there, from kindergarten to 12th grade, and make sure we correct the things that aren't being done efficiently there before we start some new program. And I also find it interesting that on the other side of the aisle, the people that are saying they are in favor of pre-K, when they want to institute this program, those children will already be 9 years old. So they never would have benefited from anything with pre-K. Mm-hmm. So we could ask Courtney, our daughter, who does this. And there are numerous places in the state of Maryland and in Harford County and Baltimore where you can go to a church or a private organization that actually has pre-K. It is, you know, it's only, when you're 3, it's usually 2 days a week for about 2 hours. When you're 4 years old, it's just maybe 2 hours on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's the way it should be. And I think for them, that's all about a headline. They want to make it seem like they are interested in helping these children. And they're not really. They just want people to vote for them because they think they're interested in children. And they really don't understand education at all and how it works and how you help those young children. And then are they going to come up with the fact that you have to take a test to go to kindergarten? Or you're going to have a pre-LST test to be able to go to school? No, that's not really well thought out.
So what is your position then on the state's existing pre-K programs? They provide support.
We help pre-K to people who, particularly younger people who have a child and they're an individual, a single mom, and it's important, but it's equally important to help them, the parent, as it is to help the young child. Usually you're helping the parent as much as you are the child. And we have programs like that that are very efficient in Harford County that have helped people at that level. But we don't need to push that out to everybody. It's really focused on a certain group of people who need that assistance.
A related question, Anita Schatz, who's in the audience, asked your position on several topics, but the first one to deal with education is what is your feeling about the Common Core standards and how they're being implemented in Maryland?
Well, I thank everybody for coming and for the questions. I tell people education is about common sense, not about Common Core. It is about making sure that politicians don't decide how students are evaluated for their achievement, how teachers are evaluated for their teaching ability, or what the curriculum is that children are taught. That is up to the teachers and the school system. I went to college for 4 years, and then I went and got my master's degree. We know how to teach. Teaching and education is about the teacher and the child in the classroom. It's not about politics. It's not about headlines. It's not about things like that. And Common Core was basically a $250 million bribe by the president when the governor was having a problem with balancing his budget and saying, we're going to give you $250 million, we're going to have this $250 million that you can give out without the understanding.
Through the race to the top.
For the race to the top.
Which included a variety of other things.
Variety of other things, but still it was, and this week, actually today, was the last day of MSA testing.
Right.
So now we're saying, oh, MSA testing's not good, let's go with PARCC testing. It's like, well, I did MSA testing. It wasn't good 20 years ago when they did it. So now they're finally admitting that that wasn't a good situation because teachers know how to test. How many children probably did not do well in their testing in the last 2 months because of all the days off because of snow? Mm-hmm. I was actually taught how to teach people to take a test. I tell the little story when kids would come into my classroom the very first time, 8th graders, I would give them a true-false test. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, all right, write from 1 to 10, write true, false. They'd say, what's the question? I said, just write true, false. And they'd write it. And then I'd show them that 4, 5, or 6 would be the average thing. They were just guessing. They didn't know. Without even knowing what the question was. And then when we would do multiple choice, they'd get 25%. Mm-hmm. So you have to get them to understand how to take a test and how to look at the test. And Melinda and I went to the middle school where our 2 oldest granddaughters go to the same class in Harford Grace. During National Education Week. It was Grandparents' Day. And we're sitting there, and I'm watching the teacher try to teach the test. And we could see that she was doing a good job doing it, but the test was not well written at all. And there was a question that there was a math group, and they asked the students to give an answer, and all the students answered in one way except one, and he had answered in another way, and his answer was correct. But they didn't judge it to be correct because of the way they had written the test. So he had already gotten it wrong. He was one of the more intelligent students in the class. So in the future, when he's taking that test, that's not really good. Mm-hmm. And then the whole idea of saying we're going to evaluate how good a school is by the educational system and whether they make the 80%. Let's say you have a student that you're teaching and they were at 80%, and then they drop below 80%. Is it because they weren't doing well in education, or was it because something happened with their family? Maybe their parents somebody had gotten ill, or they were ill themselves, they're missing time. Or let's say that you and I are both teachers and you have a student at 75% and you get them to 80, and I have one at 25% and I get them to 75. Who did the better job?
Right.
But that's not how they evaluate this.
Yeah.
And then the whole evaluation process is also wrong because they look at a school in 1 year and they go, oh, this school was at this rate at 5th graders, and then last year this is what they were. Well, guess what? That's a different group of children. Mm-hmm. Those children are now in 6th grade. You're not testing the same children. So they have that whole philosophy. So it's about creating a bureaucracy at the state level.
So if you're elected governor, how would you address these issues? Obviously in the state there's a degree of separation in the way education policy is handled because of, we've taken steps to insulate it from politics to a degree with the state school board and the state superintendent having a great deal of authority. Governors haven't typically gotten at least as obviously directly involved in these sorts of matters. How would you address it?
We need to reach out and let the local school boards and the local superintendents have much more control over what happens and not continue to send mandates down to them and let them be concerned about, because each school system is slightly different, and even internally in a school you have a slightly different population. They know the children that they work with. Let's let them work with the children. I can tell you, I did write curriculum as a teacher, so I know what it's like, but I don't think now as a politician I should be, or an elected official, that I should be writing curriculum. Teachers should do that.
Well, switching topics, Joe Walsh on Facebook asks about gun control. He'd like to know where you stand on the Second Amendment, and perhaps you could more specifically address the gun control measures that were enacted last year, your views on them, and whether you would seek to change them in any way if you're elected.
I strongly support the Second Amendment, and it is interesting that the founders of our nation, they had the First Amendment, your right to religion, your right for speech, and the second one was we probably need the right to own our own weapons to defend ourselves and our rights, and I think it's an infringement upon people's rights. We do support even concealed carry for individuals, and I've talked about those issues. And it is unfortunate that some people think that it is about gun control, but actually all those legislations pushed people out to buy more guns. That's what they do. And I can say the city of Harford Grace did a really excellent job when that issue that was really tragic up in Connecticut with that shooting in the school. What the city of Harford Grace did was they said, we're going to put a police officer in every school. Not just to be a police officer, but to reach out to kids for a variety of things. And that police car is parked out there, that person is trained to work with children, and it makes the school a safer place. So that's one issue. There are many positive things you can do to make it much more efficient. And when it comes to the actual gun control, I can tell you in Harford County, we are this year going to be claimed as the safest county in the state of Maryland. Last year we were number 2. This year we're passing by Carroll County, and we're going to number 1. We have had no murders this year in Harford County. It's not because we have gun control legislation. It's because we have a very good sheriff, very good deputy sheriffs who are out there working, very good people in our correctional facility who know how to do that, a really good state's attorney that if someone gets arrested and prosecuted, they end up going to jail. And it is about making sure there are 75,000 laws already out there about gun control. Do we need more? No, we don't need more.
Would you seek to repeal the laws that were put on the books last year?
I think we should, not just those, there are ones from years before that we
I
need
take
to
it
look at.
you would favor switching from a may issue to a shall issue state on concealed carry?
And now I have no problem with letting them do some background checks on people, to be able to buy a gun, but it doesn't need to be the way it is right now, and we could change that and make it much better.
For example, in Maryland, in contrast to under federal law, in Maryland you have to get background checks for private sales as well as gun store sales. Is that something you would support?
I think we should support changing that, yes.
Oh, you would change that as well?
Work at it, yes, with our legislature.
All right, so we've got a question from an audience member asking, well, how many budgets have you balanced? Quite a number. I'm guessing this is perhaps a softball for you.
Yes, well, I can tell you as mayor of Harford Grace, which is another reason we can reach out to the city of Baltimore, but as the mayor of Harford Grace, I did 9 of those. And some people think, well, when you move to be county executive, it's a lot different. It's just the decimal point moves. So you go from 12 to 15 million to now running a business that's $800 million, and then eventually to the state level. So I'm on my 19th budget. We just had our final meeting yesterday to work on how we're doing it and what we're doing. And we have balanced the budget. We've reduced sizes, reduced taxes, which helps people want to make a decision to stay in Harford County. That's what we want.
So how would you evaluate the way Governor OMalley has gone about shaping the state budget over the last now 8 years?
I would honestly believe that he has probably let his staff do it rather than him.
Well, fair enough.
And I can tell you that that's not what I do. My director of the budget's office is actually closer to my office than even my chief of staff, because I need to talk with her on a regular basis about the revenues and the expenditures and issues like that. And when I told department heads that they needed to cut their budget, and if they said, well, we can't, then I said, well, then I will. So then they came back and go, okay, we will. Right. And it can be done. Can the average person, what I want to do with getting rid of the income tax will require about a 3% reduction in the budget each year for the next 4 years. That's $1.2 billion. Can you live off of 3% less right now than you were yesterday? Yes, we can. If you look at what happened in the last administration, these last 7 years, the budget increased by 30%. How many people out in the state of Maryland saw an increase in their salary by 30%? There's this talk about the minimum wage. Wouldn't it have been better to not take money from people and let them have it in the first place? That's much better for your economy and make it more efficient the way you do spend their money and more transparent. So it can be done.
You've brought me directly into the next question I was going to ask is, could you describe for us your income tax plan that you put out a few weeks ago?
We started working on the income tax plan back in November. What had happened is we toured the state. We could find that different people were very frustrated in the state of Maryland with different taxes, where it was the rain tax. Thank God we don't have a snow tax for the last 2 months in the state of Maryland. Or whether it's the estate tax or tolls or gas tax or things like that. But the one that everybody really focused on was the income tax. And we looked at the other states that don't have it, the 9 states. They're both red and blue. You can go from Texas to Washington State. You know, you can go all around and see different states that don't have it. And as we see people, very frustrating personally to talk to someone and say, I'm retiring, I'm leaving the state. One of these states that doesn't have an income tax. So those 9 states represent 20% of the people of this country, but 64% of the new jobs were created in those states. So by reducing we will phase the income tax in. So during the first year, we will reduce the income tax from 6.25%, which is the top level, down to 4.25%, which it used to be at one point. And then we will show that we can actually balance the budget and actually make the budget smaller and take it in the opposite direction that it's been going for the last several years.
The brackets now, you know, they're very low brackets. Most people are in the 4.75 bracket, then there's a 5.25, and then there's 6.25, right?
And we're also going to raise the exemption that people have. So the exemption's been $3,200 for you and your wife and your children, and we're going to raise that to $5,000. So that helps the individual families at both levels. So top and bottom and in the middle. It's all about working in middle class. And then after 2 years, we will then lower it to 3%. And then after 2 more years, after we continue to balance the budget, we will eliminate it. Economy and the base of the state of Maryland be very competitive. And people, instead of saying we're moving to Delaware, they're going to say, we're not only that, we're moving back to Maryland.
So why, you alluded to this a little bit in terms of, you know, this is just the feedback you've gotten going around the state. Why do you think the income tax is more important to reduce than, say, rolling back the penny on the sales tax from the
Because everybody is getting hit with this tax. Everybody's getting hit with the income tax. And if you're fortunate and you live on the Eastern Shore and you're in Cecil County or in Worcester County, it's very easy to go to Delaware to avoid the sales tax. If you live in Hancock out in Western Maryland, it's very easy to go somewhere else. And that's really undermined businesses, retail businesses in certain counties, because we have 8 counties in the state of Maryland that are border 2 different states. And so you live in Hancock, it only takes you 3 miles to get to another state. So that's been very undermining. So they don't like that, though I will say on the sales tax, I believe to reinstore manufacturing in the state of Maryland, if something's manufactured and sold in the state of Maryland, there should be no sales tax on it. That would help our farmers, our Woodermen, our small businesses that actually create things, because that's local purchasing. That's what we want. We don't want things to have to be brought here from other states or other countries. And that would help. But the income tax was the one everybody is affected by.
Now, you mentioned the estate tax as well. There's some discussion of that going on in Annapolis right now. What's your view about what the state's policy should be on the estate tax?
Well, 2 years ago, it would have been better to eliminate the death tax rather than the death penalty. But I believe that as a minimum, we need to go to the $5 million federal level. That's as a minimum. When I was a member of the state Senate, I endorsed legislation to actually eliminate it. Here's the situation. If you are a farmer, a small business owner, you know, plumber, whatever, and you want your children to then, you know, inherit your business and move on with it, if it's over if it's over $1 million, they have to pay for it. You've already paid the taxes on those things. That is ridiculous to make them have to pay a new tax on something you've already paid a tax on. So we need to at least get to the $5 million level, but ultimately we need to eliminate it. And that would really help small businesses.
Another tax question for you. What about the gas tax increase that went into effect last year? What would you do about that?
The gas tax increase not only went up last time, but the 2 next biggest increases are on January 1st, 2016 right. and July 1st, 2016. So people who are frustrated with how high that has gone up will see it even worse in another year and a half, unless we have a governor who says, no, we're going to get rid of it at first of those 2. I don't want to create cynicism among people to say I'm going to lower it immediately, because I have to make sure that the governor didn't bond it and spend it. It's like giving somebody a credit card and saying, here's your new credit card.
It's
already maxed out.
I think you may discover that to be the case.
Yeah, so what we will look at is we will start changing projects, because there are certain lines like the red line and the purple line, which are in the opposite places they should be. We're purple, but we're getting red, and DC's, red, and they're getting purple.
Fair point.
But, these are $2.5 billion projects, but by the time they're built, well, by the time it's finally done, they'll probably be $3 to $4 billion for these new projects. And we should be spending the money to fix things that are broken first before we put it into those types of projects, which really, if you look at when they did certain other projects, or talked about it, the Dover Bridge over in Eastern Shore. Ehrlich put the money in for that at $40 million. The current governor took it out, spent it somewhere else, and now is saying, oh, guess what, we're putting that bridge back in. Now it's $52 million. So it could have been done a long time ago. It would have been much better to have done it that way.
We also got a question about tolls. Obviously, I know the Hayden Bridge where you are is a very hot topic. Tolls have obviously gone up a lot during the last several years, largely to do with the paying off the bonds for the ICC. What do you think? Is there anything the next government can do to try to mitigate that?
Yes, I can tell you that the Hayden Bridge was built in 1940. It's paid for itself how many times? Once it had paid off its debt, we should have eliminated the toll on that immediately. And the same thing with the Tidings Bridge. I think that we're the only place in the country that has a beltway, but you have to pay to go over the bridge at the Key Bridge. There shouldn't even have been a toll on that. And if they actually, I was on the ICC last night, there was hardly any cars on it because the toll was $3.20.
First person in history
but
to use it.
If they actually lowered the toll, more people would use it. So,
I believe Doug Gansler says the same thing.
Yeah, charging less brings you more in the long run. I can tell you that it cost me $8 to cross the Hayden Bridge to go to the cemetery where my parents are buried. That's not good, to do a thing like that. If you own a semi-tractor trailer, it costs you $48 to cross that bridge. I have a neighbor who is a charter fisherman, has a boat, costs him $36 to take that over there. That's not what should have been done. And I believe the toll on I-95 at both Hayden and the Tidings Bridge should have been moved up to I-95 near the Delaware line. And then the people from New Jersey and Delaware and New York would be paying it, and the people from Cecil County wouldn't be paying to leave and get back in their own county. That's horrible for them to do.
A lot of you've mentioned several taxes you'd like to see rolled back or eliminated altogether. All this starts to add up. You said your income tax, you think you can do at least the first phase with a 3% cut in state spending. Now, this is actual 3% cut?
Actual 3%, and it's not a reduction in the increase. This is a real reduction.
Yeah. All this is going to start to add up. Are there things you can point to in the state budget where you'd say, hey, we don't need to be doing this anymore. This was maybe a good idea at one point. It's not working. Are there things that you can identify right now?
The key to being able to balance a budget is really to have a good director for me or a secretary of those 20 departments to actually work on their budget and get rid of duplication. I found as the county executive that different departments would be buying IT equipment or software or hardware, and then we would find that another department already had that. They didn't need to buy it. So we now have a very good director who runs that department, and if you want to buy something, you have to go to him, and he goes, no, we already have that. You don't need it. Yeah. Or here's what we have, and it's slightly different from what you're asking for, but you can do that. So it ends duplication in government, and there's a lot of duplication that we can eliminate, and it's about having a good team. I'm sure Buck Showalter knows this. You have to have a good team to be able to win the game. And so to have the 20 really good department heads who can run their department and make it efficient and do it well, that's going to be the thing we will reach out to, and they will make some determination. Now, they'll be bringing it to me, so it'll ultimately be on my table when I get done, but I've been doing that for 19 years, so I know how it's done. And that is a big difference between me and any other candidate. Running for governor, being the governor, is not an entry-level position. I'm sure Buck Showalter is not going to ask somebody to go to the mound and start pitching in a game and say, oh, that guy never pitched. We need somebody that can actually do it. And so it's not just about talking about our plan, it's about showing the plan that we did. We lowered our property tax in Harford County by twice, and it actually saved Harford County us $50 million. But we now have 8,000 more jobs. Less is better, and I learned that from reading biographies of Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge lowered income tax from 75% to 25%, and he doubled the amount that was brought in because it helped the economy. That's what you do. You have a bigger economy, and that's what we need to do for the city of Baltimore. Baltimore is a wonderful place. We have really good connections, And it had 1 million people living here, and now it's down to slightly like 650,
620.
that era. And that's not good. We need to really restore the manufacturing that took place. I really applaud the mayor for what she's trying to do for the CSX system, that will really help the port be restored.
This is the intermodal facility.
It doesn't need to be in Howard County or any other. It needs to be in Baltimore City, near that, because for a while we were the most competitive port on the East Coast. If she can get that, and the mayor can help her, and the federal government can help her do that, that will create jobs, and it will expand business, and all
and
that
certainly with the
types of things.
competitive advantage the port has with the dredging in preparation for the Panama Canal widening, it certainly there's a great opportunity there.
Yeah.
Now, we've got another question from the audience that's related, I think, to a lot of what we've been talking about here, is how would you improve Maryland's poor business climate? I guess it presumes that you think it is a poor business climate.
We have been, well, the first thing are the tax rates that have really injured our economy, and the opposite has happened. We've been very successful in Harford County. As I said, we have 8,000 new jobs. I have a very good director and Department of Economic Development who reach out to people. The key is, first, to work to preserve the jobs that already exist here. Wouldn't it have been good to preserve all those manufacturing jobs and companies that were here that have left? That, we all talk to somebody and their grandfather worked there or their father worked there, things like that, Sparrow's Point. You work on that first, and that's what we did in Harford County. We reach out to the businesses that are here. What is it that we're doing that's helpful? What are we doing that's not helpful to you? And that's what you do first. And then you start reaching out to see who you can bring in. And you have to understand, Melinda and I have 3 children. They all have the same last name, but they're all different. You have to understand that the needs of each business are different. And it's interesting to see what they're doing in New York now with that 10-year tax, they're going to do their tax reduction. We did that in Haverty Grace 30 years ago. We had, and it increased our manufacturing businesses there for a long time. You have to be able to do things like that. So you have to reach out and say, what is it that's going to influence you to be here? Sometimes it's about having really well-educated employees. And so we have a grant program in Harford County where if a business says we're going to expand by 30 new businesses, we'll give them a $60,000 education grant if they put $60,000 in, but they have to guarantee that those jobs will exist for a certain length of time.
Right.
And so your workforce is one, the taxes is another. Those are 2 of the key issues. We also have a very good team that knows what's available, what property is available, how it's owned.
So what do you see as the biggest growth opportunities for Maryland business, for private enterprise in this?
Some of it's not, well, we really need to start moving away from just depending on the government, whether it's federal government, state government, local government. We need to make sure that we have private businesses. It's a diverse economy that you need. So in Harford County, we have over 100 manufacturers. Everybody thinks Aberdeen Proving Ground is just it, but it is a key to make sure you have a diverse economy. And you see these, look what happened to Detroit when, car manufacturing started to disappear. It dies. So you can't just base it on one thing. And we need to reach out. But I have told people we can make Maryland the Silicon Bay as opposed to the Silicon Valley. And I did have lunch with Rick Perry back in September, and I told him, I said...
when he was so graciously here to invite our businesses to
And I
Texas.
told him, I said, you're not going to want me to be the governor because we'll be very competitive. Not only that, but we went down to Austin, Texas, and we got one of the people down there who teaches venture capitalism and angel investment. We had them come up here and start teaching it up here so that we could start those types of programs up here. So, but the key on things like cyber security and those types of things, we want the businesses not only to invent the product, we want it developed here. There is an excellent company that is working out of College Park called Redox, R-E-D-O-X, it's capital letters. They are inventing a new system so that it's like a new furnace for your house, that it goes back to the Thomas Alva Edison days where you don't need to be hooked up to electricity anywhere, and you can use natural gas, and you can actually produce it there, and it is 90% more efficient than all of the other programs out there. So it's environmentally good, but they're looking not only to create the thing, but to manufacture it here. They have a ceramic company out in Frederick that's manufacturing some of the things on the filtering system they have. So you reach out to things like that that are new. And that's a good environmental one that we could actually do.
Yeah.
That would be phenomenal for the state of Maryland.
Yeah, what do you think our big competitive advantages are vis-a-vis other states?
Right now, we don't have competitive advantages because of all of our different taxes. In
Or
many
how
ways.
about our
But
potential competitive advantages?
The best potential, and I would say the best thing that helped us with base realignment and closure are our universities and colleges and our technology schools and the education that we have of people at the community colleges and things such as that. They saw that our workforce was so good and so adept at what they needed to do that was really influential in the president saying, all right, we are going to move toward Aberdeen Proving Ground and make it a really super base, because they were expecting that they were going to need 20 new PhDs a year. They were going to need 260 master's degrees every year for the next several years to do all the programs that they have. And the other thing is an extension of what goes on post at Aberdeen or at Edgewood. It also, some of those products are then becoming private. You have a GPS system in your car.
Right.
Well, guess what? They had that in the military a long time before you got it.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that will be moved over to private businesses. For example, they had the breathing apparatus that was developed in a company in Harford County for soldiers who were going into a chemical warfare area. But then they realized we can sell this to fire companies and firefighters, we can sell it to police agencies, we can emergency operations and things like that. And they realized that they were making 400,000 of these products for the military, but they could make millions of them on the private side. So we have to make that connection with those businesses.
There's been a lot of talk in the university system in the last several years about the need to take a lot of the raw research activity that goes on in the state. You know, obviously, we're a huge recipient of research money from the federal government and whatever other sources, but mainly the federal government. But there's been a complaint that too little of that is translating into people going out and starting jobs and doing the kinds of things that you're talking about. What do you think you as governor could do to help encourage that?
It's similar to what we did on the educational side. You make sure that if you get that money, then you have to make sure it expands at some point. Otherwise, you got to pay it back. You know, if you don't actually manufacture get the product created and get your patents for it, or if you don't actually start educating people to work with the product, then you haven't done what you promised to do when you were given that grant. You have to keep those people online for things such as that.
One other higher ed question while we're on the topic. You have a degree from Morgan. What are your thoughts about the state's HBCUs? You know, they've had this longstanding lawsuit against the state seeking greater funding or protection from program duplication. How do you see them fitting into the system, and what do you think the state needs to do to make them ultimately successful?
Well, we need to have an open door with all the presidents of the different universities to make sure that we can work with them, because we don't need duplicative programs at Morgan and Towson. You don't need to have the option to go to both. That was the old days before the 1965 period, when we had 3 different colleges on one side and 3 on the other.
Right.
And so now that they've merged into one system, well, 5 of them are into one system and separate, we need to make sure that if Morgan is going to have an engineering program, and that's all they need. We don't need 5 of them. You know. So we can work on those types of programs to ensure that everybody has a good, solid base and educate them. When I went to Towson, most people went there because they were going to become an educator.
Right.
So it wasn't that you had to go there and get every possible degree that you could get.
We've got a question that's been very popular. I think somebody has submitted a version of this question to every gubernatorial candidate who's come in, which is, in what instances is it more appropriate for offenders to pay a fine than receive prison time when involved with marijuana? Hot topic of the day. Everybody seems to want to hear the gubernatorial candidates' views on marijuana possession.
I believe that all of us realize that addiction is not a good thing. And whether there are people who drink too much, people who smoke cigarettes too much. I find it very amazing that there are people on one side who say we want to make it legal for people to smoke marijuana, but we're trying to make it more illegal for them to smoke a cigarette someplace,
yes, right.
or a cigar someplace. So why are they going in an opposite direction in that way? How many of us would want to be able to take our grandchildren to a nursing school and think, did that teacher actually smoke marijuana last night? We don't want to have them having smoked alcohol, drank alcohol that night, but marijuana stays in your blood system for over 30 days. So that makes it even worse. We had that situation not long ago in another state where a little 6-year-old child was pulled out by the school system and thought he had been smoking marijuana, and it turned out second-degree smoking from his parents smoking marijuana had actually impacted him that way.
Yeah.
So expanding the ability of people to have more addiction to anything like that is not a good way to go. And then to claim that you're going to do it so you can raise taxes to pay for kids to go to pre-K, that's kind of ridiculous. You know, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah,
and
well,
I'm sure most of us are not going to be glad that now it would be legal for our grandchildren to smoke marijuana.
Right, well, folks, you can hear all about that next week when Heather Mazier will be here. But anyway, back to some nuts and bolts of government here. A question from the audience. Can you see a reasonable approach to our underfunded liability for pensions and state employee retiree health insurance? You know, that's another topic going on in Annapolis right now.
And really, when people ask what are the two of the hardest things in balancing your budget when you're the county executive, the mayor, and the governor, does have to do with pensions and health care costs. Yeah. Because you get locked in on certain things. And this $19 billion deficit that we have, if you look back in 2000, we were at about 100%. And unfortunately, they started taking money out and not putting money in to the program.
Reducing their contributions.
And you know, they spent almost $240 million to pay investors who did a horrible job on it, when we actually could have had other, you know, we could have had small investors doing it at a much lower rate. But we also, I did this as county executive, we do have a pension system for our correctional facility people. Well, it was based on investing the money at 30 years, but the average correctional person retires at 20 years. That is like you buying a car for 7 years, and at 5 years you have to get rid of it and get a new one, and now you have to pay for 2 cars for those 2 years. That's bad. That is kicking the can down the road. That's what happened to Detroit and places like that. So we changed our policy that it's only invested for 15 years. It was very expensive the first year we did that, but it fixed a problem.
Right.
And it's
essentially
easy,
like having a 15-year mortgage instead of 30.
Yes, it's easy to say, oh, guess what, I don't have to resolve this problem while in office. It's always nice to hear a governor say, oh, I've got this problem fixed in 2023. Well, I don't think you're going to be in office in 2023. Shouldn't you try to get these things fixed?
I think it's actually 2039 when it's supposed to be fixed. But
yeah, but they keep moving it back. Because the other thing that was very frustrating as a county executive is when they shifted a large part of that pension cost to county governments and said, you have to put this money in, the teacher and library pensions. And that cost Harford County over $10 million. That's money I could have put into the school system, help pay teacher salaries increases and education. And I have no control over how that money is invested. And then to hear that the governor he said he's going to put $300 million in, and then he reduced it to 200, and then he reduced it to 100, and now they're saying, oh, we're 200 million short, so it might not be any.
In fairness, it's the state senate that decided to kick it down to 100. But yeah.
Oh, I didn't see any complaint from the second floor
I have not seen
on that whole issue. So you really have to resolve those things, and we did resolve those issues for our employees on health care benefits. We made changes. We grandfathered in we didn't want to affect people who were promised that they were going to get something. But we made the changes on July 1st, 2010 for different health care benefits, and actually our employees liked it and thought it was a very good program for them because the money actually follows them now. So if they leave Harford County government, the money goes with them to their next job. That's the much better way to do it. And that we need to work on those systems. I did speak against what was happening on the pension system when it was done, and I did tell the treasurer and the comptroller, they said, what's the first thing you would do? And I said, you need to fire your investor.
Yeah. There are some people who say, forget investors altogether, just put it in index funds, we would be doing better.
Well, I learned this also as Mayor Harford Grace. We had a system where the money in our pension system was just in a checking account. You don't do it that way.
Yes, obviously.
You really have to you have to analyze how many employees do you think will retire within 5 years, so you need some money put in a short-term investment, how many will retire in 10 to 15 years, so you have it in midterm, and how many will be a long way out, so you can have it in long-term investments. And you have to, depending on your liability, you may have to put a lot into the first one first to get there, so it varies from spot to spot. So I learned that a lot when I was the mayor of Harford Grace, and I could always tell when the bad news was coming because the treasurer would knock on the door and I could hear her coughing and I could see her shadow, and then she'd back up and it's like, oh, this is going to be bad news. So I'm used to that.
Yeah. While we're on the topic of healthcare, obviously one of the big stories of this last 6 or 8 months has been the Maryland Health Insurance Exchange. If you were in charge now, what would be your approach to trying to fix this problem, and what do you think is going to be on the table for you when you become governor next year?
Well, you never know what's going to be on the table.
Yeah.
I've learned that having moved from mayor to county executive, you don't know what's going to be left on the table. You can assume that you might know, but you won't.
Yeah.
The whole system is horrible. They spent over $240 million on a system that was broken. Mm-hmm. If they were going to do it that way, it would have been much better to have done a pilot program and said, all right, here's what we're doing. Let's see if it works first. And let's see if a certain number of people can come in. But I think they estimated it's been $10,000 a person just to be filing on these systems. It was very frustrating watching the Super Bowl and seeing Blue Cross Blue Shield say it only takes you 10 minutes to file with us. Uh-huh. And you have people that sat on the phone for hours and never got through to this other system because the groups that they brought in to do this, a lot of them had never done it. We had private brokers in the state of Maryland who could have done this. We could have just said, you guys do this and you'll get a certain amount for being able to do it, or a deduction, or whatever it might be. And we did not need this bureaucracy to come in and say, create these jobs. We had those jobs out there. Mm-hmm. These people have done it for a long time, carriers and things like that. So it could have been done without having it done the way it is. The unfortunate thing also is it's becoming unaffordable. And a lot of people are losing their health care. Companies are saying, well, we're not going to do this anymore. Problem.
We have just a sort of a general question from the audience about your professional and political history. Okay. They ask, are you a career politician? Have you ever owned a business? So fill us in a little bit on your background.
Well, I can tell you that my career is as a teacher and assistant principal. So for 34 years, that's what I did. That's what paid for the roof over the heads. That's what paid for the food on the table and the clothes on our backs, and for our children to go to college, and our son who's a Navy veteran. So that's why my career is as a teacher. I still like to teach. Mm-hmm. Still teach Sunday school. Yeah.
What did you teach?
I taught 8th grade, yeah. Usually history or government, sometimes English and reading. Yeah. So that's what I usually taught. And every once in a while I would do 7th grade, depending on the school population and things like that. But I really liked teaching, and that's what I did. I got into political office because if you go to Harvard Grace High School, you see a sign of the motto which says, enter to learn, leave to serve. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting in our church, it's enter to worship, leave to serve. Turned out I did historic research on it. Same man wrote both of them because he was the vice principal at Harvard Grace High School, but he was the choral director of our church in the early 1900s. Yeah. And so I picked up on the fact that it is about service, volunteerism and things like that. So I ran for Harvard Grace City Council. It was one of these things where the city was in bad financial shape, and I thought I can sit on the sideline and complain and say I have a solution, or I can actually get involved and do it. I want this to be a good place to live and turn it around. And we worked at that. So the political career, if you want to talk about a political career, I started as a Harvard Grace City Councilman in 29, did that for 3 terms, then I became the mayor. And I was the youngest person to ever be selected as mayor, which was interesting. I was always told I was going to lose too, so right. How can you win? And then after that...
We have a question about that later.
All right, well then after that, I decided I needed to finish my master's degree at Morgan State. So I stepped out of office for a year until I finished those things. And then came up with the concept that I need to get back in service. Mm-hmm. And thought about running. And this is why I say it's not an entry-level position to be governor. I sent letters to people, and my father sent me a letter, and I still have it. It said, you got to walk before you can run. Yeah. Don't run for county executive or senate, run for the House of Delegates. Mm-hmm. So I ran for the House of Delegates. I served there for 4 years, then I served in the Senate for 4 years, then I left office again to finish my career as an educator, and then was asked to go back and run as mayor because it was in some...
Right.
So I went back to be the mayor, and then my predecessor, Jim Harkins, good friend, right. was appointed to be the director of MES, Maryland Environmental Services, by Bob Ehrlich. And so we had an appointment process. I put my name in, and I got appointed, served for 2 years, and then got elected in 2006, and then got reelected in 2010. Right. But we have term limits, which I support. I believe the executive side should definitely have term limits.
So we have a couple more sort of general questions along those lines, but I would be remiss if I did not ask you made a reference to this earlier and I didn't follow up at the time. I apologize about the rain tax, okay. Or as some of us like to call it the stormwater management fee. What you have certainly been very clear that you oppose the rain tax. You sought to repeal it in Harford County. What would you do as governor about this? And if not the rain tax, how would you comply with the EPA's pollution mandates?
First, I have always disagreed as a city council mayor and as a county official to state mandates. Unfunded state mandates are not fair. And so the rain tax was just the newest of many of those that have been pushed on local government to say, you're going to do this, and
This has a slightly different twist that say, and you have to raise taxes.
You have to raise a tax or a fee, or you have to do this, whether it's the flush tax or whatever it might be, which is not what we do. That's actually a state tax. So I've always been opposed to those, but the rain tax issue was not based on what we were actually doing. It was just that they had said Harford County has to raise $90 million. There were no projects that were ever mentioned, what we had to do, the specifics of how it was going to be instituted. And then they finally modified it and said, all right, $30 million over the next 3 years, that's what you have to do. So it was always about the bottom line. We have one of the best stream restoration projects that go on in Harford County, a very good group that have been doing this. And if you look at the situation, I really disagreed with the whole concept, and I was the first elected official to say I'm opposed to the rain tax. Baltimore County, Harford County, Cecil County. Baltimore and Harford County share the Gunpowder River. Yeah. Harford and Cecil share the Susquehanna River. Except 99% of the water in the Susquehanna River is coming from Pennsylvania. Right. So it's not our pollution. But whatever we come up with to do in Harford County, Cecil County is exempt. They don't have to do it right now. Yeah. Obviously, after this is over, I'm sure that someone would push and say, oh, now we're going to hit the other 14 counties and make them do it. And they could never come up with what was the best way to actually resolve problems. And it's very frustrating for different businesses. Let's say you were a farmer. We told farmers, by state law, you have to put a concrete pad for manure. Now you got to pay a tax on that. We made them do it, but now we're going to tax them for it. That's not fair. That was supposed to be the solution to that problem. Now it's another solution. Or the fact that I could put a tax on a private school, but not a public school. They were exempt. Right. Or the fact that in Harford County, when it comes to the federal level with EPA, they exempt themselves. So I have Aberdeen Proving Ground, very wonderful facility. They've done a nice job on, it's one of the best places to see eagles. 80,000 acres, but they're exempt. Right. So why is someone exempt? And actually it should have been done on the watershed, because the Gunpowder River is much different than the Bush River, much different than the Patapsco River. You name it, you look at what's there, whether it's farming or whether it's industrial issues or whether it's forest, they're all different. So we should have looked at each watershed first to see what it was. That would have been much better to improve it. And the state should have come up with these, and the state should have run the pilot programs, and that's what I would do as governor. We're going to run the pilot programs to prove that this works before we make you do it. That's kind of like a parent. So essentially, you don't object to the idea that we need to control stormwater runoff that gets into the bay. You just don't think this is an effective way to do it. It wasn't the effect. It's kind of like parents telling your children, you have to clean the room up, but I'm not cleaning my room up. You know, if you want to clean the whole house up, I guess you should take the lead and show them how to do it. That's what the state and the federal government should have done. They should have done that first. Okay. We have a couple of sort of similar general questions, one from Paul LaBelle and one from another audience member asking sort of similar things. You know, how are you different? How do you distinguish yourself from the other Republican candidates? And you know, what makes you special? We agree personally on many of the political issues, on issues like taxes and things like that. The big difference is what I've talked about the fact that this is not an entry-level position. There are other people who are running who have never won a general election. There are other people who have never run for office. So you can't just do that. You know, you have to start and learn at the level and do it first. And my running
also,
mate,
for that matter, among the candidates on both sides, the only one with unless you count a lieutenant governor,
a little different being lieutenant governor.
Yeah, the only one with real executive experience.
Yeah. That is hugely different. But we also have a really, I mean, with Jeannie Hadaway on board, Jeannie has more experience, and she's only 36 years old. She's running for she's a member of the House of Delegates. She could have had a safe seat for the rest of her life. But she was willing to say, you know, I am willing to do this and to make the offer to people. And she could do the job, and she has more experience as a delegate than all of the others anyway. So when you add her to the team, collectively, we have such a good team together that can actually do the work and actually understand how to do it. And I can tell you that it extends not just beyond budgets and things like that. I mean, I've been the county executive. I know what it's like to have the worst blizzard that we've ever had. I know what it's like to get hit by a tornado, or what it's like to have an earthquake, and how to handle those situations, and and it's about having a good team of people. And that's why I tell people, you know, when you look at like a Buck Showalter or a Harbaugh or something like that, you can't win on things if you don't have a very good team of people who can actually do it. You might have the best game plan in the world, but if you don't have a good team, you're not going to win.
So a tack on to this question, one of the question writers asked, you know, what do you do on day one? You know, you're being sworn in January of 2015. The session has already been going for like a week or two before they swear in the governor. Budget is already well into swing before you get there.
10 days into swing or before you get there.
Yeah. What do you do on day one? You know, you've obviously spent a lot of time in Annapolis. You've seen governors come in. What would be your approach? What's the first thing?
The key is going to be not just what you do on day one. It's what you start doing on November 5th, because you have from November 5th to January 21st when you get sworn in, and that is about getting your team of people that are going to do your transition team. Have that ready to make sure you get the top level people ready for appointments, that you have your new Secretary of State, you know, you go down the list, Secretary of Agriculture, that you have those people on board ready, and that you've also reached out to your predecessor. I mean, I did that as county executive with Jim Harkins. I did it as mayor 2 different times with 2 different mayors. Reach out to them and their staff to find out what is going to be on the desk when you walk in as much as possible, so that you're ready for it. I can tell you, usually the first thing you do is you start answering the phone a lot because people are calling to saying, but you get busy. And it is a 24-hour-a-day kind of job for a long time, but the commute is very easy walking across the street. So
that is nice.
That's not too bad. But you have to be ready for that. And that's the most important thing is start the job on November 5th. I'm not going to go to Disney World if I win. I'm going to get ready to work.
So you know, the prospect of sitting down with Martin OMalley to talk this through brings a question to my mind. Looking back on Governor OMalley's career, his last 7.5 years now, can you point to some things you think that he has done that have been good? You know, obviously there are a lot of things that you've disagreed with.
Well, you know, he and I get along well when it comes to, I was president of MACO, and we would sit in the room and talk about issues, and sometimes he would say, you've been very quiet. It's like, well, I don't agree with what you're doing. I'm trying to be polite. I would say that, you know, the tax issues overwhelm any of the other good things that were done. I really do think they've undermined the whole state and the frustration of people. So that's been the wrong direction. But we get along personally when we see each other.
So the $1 million question here from
Have to pay a tax on that?
On the
$1 million question? Or you gonna have a tax on?
It's a very reasonable rate.
Okay, all right.
And dedicated to a fund that I'll only crack into if I really need to or want to.
Crack.
Yeah. So how do you plan to win this election as a Republican in the state of Maryland? How can this be done?
All right. I say this to people for a long time because I coached soccer for 25 seasons. And I'm sure you watch football games and you see John Harbaugh and he's getting ready to call the next play, and what is he doing? He has something in front of his mouth like this so that the other guy can't see what he's going to do.
So you've got a secret strategy?
It's not a secret strategy. I mean, this is my 21st election. We know how to run the game on the floor, at the ground level. We know how to run it at the 30,000-foot level. We have a good team of people on board that have worked hard on campaigns and continue to work hard on campaigns. And we know exactly what we need to do it. We know it's going to be a difficult race. It's always a difficult race. Everybody thinks that it's just because Republicans or Democrats. Every race is difficult. When I ran for county executive the first time, you know, it was everybody's, oh, well, you're the incumbent. Sometimes the incumbent can be harmful to you. So you have to understand that every election is slightly different than the previous election that you might have had. I was very honored in 2010 when I got 82% of the vote in the county. That was pretty high. So I was happy about that. But you can't assume you're going to get 82% all the time. So you have to work at it.
William Donald Schaefer.
Well, he didn't get 82. He didn't get that the second time he ran. After he made the comment about the Eastern Shore, he didn't get that comment. So you have to be ready to do it, and it is possible to do. And we have all the analysis that we need to do on how to do it, and we can do it. There are some specifics that I share with certain people on the team about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And a lot of the people know that I push them pretty hard because I was a pretty hard coach when I was coaching soccer to make sure everybody knew that it was about team. So you have to have a good team and a good game plan. You got to put those two things together and really work at it on a regular basis. So we're not home a lot.
Yeah.
We're out and about a lot.
Now, Bob Ehrlich pretty famously said after his first loss to Governor OMalley that the trends in the state were such that a Republican really could not win here statewide anymore. The second time, I guess he tried to prove that. But what do you see that's maybe different from how he viewed the political landscape in this state?
As I said a little earlier, every race is slightly different. You go to the beach and you're riding in the waves. Every wave's slightly different. You have to be ready for that particular wave and be watching it and knowing that. As a coach, I always knew that there were teams that we were going to be. I always expected the other team to show up.
Yeah.
So you have to really play. And I also would know that there were teams that were finesse teams, and we had to play them in a different way than there were teams that were rough teams. So I would get that information across to the players on the team. And when my team walked off the field, you didn't know if they had won or lost because I all knew it was about the team, and it wasn't about. I used the 19 thing about the hockey team. It's about not your name on the back. It's about the team you're working for. And for us, it's about working for Maryland. And here it's about working for Baltimore. So we know how to do it. We know what the swings are. I do tell people if I get 50.1, that's a landslide.
Yeah.
If it's 50.2, that's a mandate that they want us in there. But if you look at races where we've had open seat races with a very good person running, you go back to for R. McKeldin. And you go back to Ellen Sauber, you go back to Bob Ehrlich, and these open seat races, they do a very good job in getting the votes out there. So there are a lot of people who will not just vote for the letter that's behind your name. They're going to vote for you because they trust you or they have good faith in your background and what you can do. Very open.
All right. Well, on that note, Mr. Craig, thank you so much for coming in this evening. It's been
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thank you, everyone.